until the end of the day, both. I'm both.
Sounds good. As I said, we're joined with Councilwoman and Massachusetts State Senator Lydia Edwards. And Councilwoman Edwards, one second here. So she served as a member of the Boston City Council from the 1st District since 2018, and as a member of the Massachusetts State Senate from the 1st Suffolk and Middlesex districts since 2022. So congratulations on your election to the State Senate. She previously served as the Deputy Director within the Mayor's Office of Housing Stability, where she was responsible for developing and delivering innovative solutions to fight displacement. Councilor Edwards also worked as a public interest attorney with Greater Boston Legal Services, focusing on labor issues such as fighting for access to unemployment insurance, back wages, fair treatment for domestic workers, and combating human trafficking. She served as the statewide campaign coordinator for the Massachusetts Coalition for Domestic Workers, which advocated for the passage of the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. In 2015, she was also named Bostonian of the Year by the Boston Globe. And Councilor Edwards graduated from American University Washington College of Law and received a LM in taxation from the Boston University School of Law. And I hope I did your bio justice. As I said, we're very excited to have you with us today, Councilor. I first learned about the work that you had done on the Affirmatively Furthering for Housing zoning amendment. I think last fall there was another webinar or Zoom event that you were part of that I happened to tune into, and I was so excited to learn about the work that Boston has done in this field. And this is exactly what in Arlington and the DC metro region is we're looking at rising home prices and increasing affordability problems within our communities, efforts to really incorporate anti-displacement and an analysis of who's benefiting from the different development projects and things that are happening in our communities, and especially looking out for how protected classes are impacted by those types of decisions that are made. And so we're super excited to have you tell us more about the experiences that Boston has had over the last year after adopting the AFFH zoning amendment. And so I think with that, Councilor Edwards, if you could start by just telling us more about, what exactly this zoning amendment is, and what does it do for Boston, and how has it changed your zoning and planning process?
Absolutely. So if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to do a quick understanding of the history of AFFH as a concept, where it came from. I have a slideshow that helps guide us through that and how Boston got in the business of it, and kind of brings it from historic passage in '68 to why on earth we'd be touching it in zoning. As part of, I'll be making side comments about what exactly zoning has been in Boston, and I think there's a common theme, honestly, nationally, that zoning has been by far the most effective tool at segregating our country and communities. And so what this does is makes zoning, instead of the injuring force that it has been, a healing force instead. And because it's in zoning, which is the most, I would say the most control a municipal government would ever have is in its zoning. But the best part, because it's in zoning, it covers public and private actors at the same time. So I'll go through that, and then I look forward to a robust conversation, really good questions. So again, I'm Lydia Edwards. I'm currently the City Councilor for District 1, which includes Charlestown, you've seen the movie The Town, the North End, which is Little Italy, and East Boston. I live in East Boston. I'm not actually born in Boston. I came here after law school and became a lawyer, and then became a community organizer. And somehow, some way, I've been honored to represent this incredible city. And then most recently, I ran and became the first person of color and woman to represent this area in the state Senate. And today, I'm the only African-American state senator we have in the state of Massachusetts. But back to AFFH. So this slide starts with what I think the true understanding of how AFFH became part of the lexicon in our housing policy today. But it does, we have to remember, it comes all the way back to 1968 in the Fair Housing Act. AFFH is not new, but the Obama administration came up with regulations for the first time to make it real. And it literally came up with this definition that we adopted in Boston, which is it means to take meaningful steps beyond simply combating discrimination. So beyond the Black people are not allowed or the segregated water fountains, traditionally discrimination or anti-discrimination policy has been to take that sign down only, and then it stops there. To stop an injury when it's become readily apparent that it's been intentionally done to racially harm. That's a pretty high bar. And it's really been one that has slowed down, I think, some of the most aggressive integrating tools that we've had. Instead, we said, no, to affirmatively further fair housing, you have to take meaningful steps to remove obstacles to opportunity. That is the argument. That's the goal. That's the plan. It means to proactively address significant disparities, assess community assets, and to overcome segregated living patterns. That's to affirmatively further fair housing. It isn't just enough to wait for someone to be told that they can't get an apartment. So that's in 2015. And in 2017, so 2016, actually, we're skipping over the election of Donald Trump, which resulted in, of course, the undoing of some of the most progressive legislation in the country, including this. And so the city of Boston said, the Trump administration came out and said, we're not going to do this. City of Boston said, but we will. So one tool that I would recommend if any city or town is interested in AFFH is creating an advisory committee of community folks from your civil rights, from your housing advocates, from your organizers. And that's what they did. And they assessed all points of the municipal government and whether it was impeding the affirmatively furthering fair housing goals, what kind of goals that needed to be adopted. There were 14 public meetings, and they got to work. They got to work immensely and created a robust, beautiful report. And recommended in that report was putting AFFH in zoning. And so that's really where a lot of this comes from. And I would start naming people's names, and then I'm gonna not be good enough. But let me just tell you, the OGs from the 70s and 80s in Boston who have been organizing for years were part of this advisory committee, and they did an incredible job. So in 2018, they actually, the Trump administration then not just said we're not going to do it, but they were like, we're going to make it the opposite. And so the community advisory committee then pushed forward the report, and I introduced in 2019, based on the report, the zoning amendment. And it was mostly because my district is in a displacement crisis. It is a district that has, busing. It was the center of the busing controversy in the 70s. And it is also a district with one of the greatest opportunities in Boston history, which is Suffolk Downs. It is the single largest private development in Boston's history, and that happens to be in East Boston. They're going to build 10,000 housing units. It is open. There's nothing there. There's no infrastructure. We're literally building a whole new neighborhood, 10,000 housing units. And so the question is, what lessons have we learned? When we had that opportunity before in Boston, it's called the Seaport, if you've ever been here. And we allowed developers to really run roughshod in that area. And they built according to their bottom line. And it is a concrete, it's a concrete, no parks, no schools, most of us don't even consider it a real neighborhood. It is the whitest neighborhood we've ever built and the richest. And we built it that way. And we have to acknowledge things don't like that just don't happen naturally. We built it that way. So the question is, how did our zoning allow for that or encourage that? And why aren't we telling our zoning to do better? So what does this do? We have a process under which large projects go through a whole analysis. So after they go through their analysis, and they have several points, we look at your traffic, we look at your environmental impact, we look at your density, we look at street, all these different aspects. And what this requires now is that you will look at whether this project affirmatively further fair housing. It's one more aspect in which we're going to judge your project. And after you submit your project as a developer, you are given 2 reports from the City of Boston. One, looking at the historic segregation of the area that you have bought into, and 2, whether there's a displacement crisis. Because we're telling the developer, this is what you're buying, all of this, not just the land and the building. You're buying the history, the harm, and also the wonderful opportunities. You're welcome to be part of helping us to heal. Then they are given that assessment. They're given an assessment tool where they have to say, who lives there? Who's going to live there? You expect, what are your average rents going to be? Have you displaced any individuals? Did you require the building to be delivered to you vacant? Are you getting rid of the only grocery store? Are you creating a food desert? Are you creating a transportation desert? What are you doing with this? And every developer knows what they're going to do. Every single one, they have a plan to get to their bottom line, and we demand to know what it is. So you have the assessments from the city, you have their self-assessment, and then all of that, they need to then come up with a list. They're given a list of mitigation to help with the healing. You can include more Section 8 vouchers. You can have right of first refusal for tenants to purchase their building. You can agree to do additional forms of affordable units. You can agree to do more family size units. There's a whole list, 20, 30 things, and it's a growing list forever of ways in which you can heal. They're given all of that. They have to fill out all of that. And they then go to step 2, where an interagency of the Fair Housing Development Committee will assess if they've actually met that goal of affirmatively furthering fair housing with their mitigation plan. And if they have not, they're not allowed to go forward with their project. You're going to go right back to the community. You're going to assess and work with them, and you're going to figure out how you're going to help heal. But ultimately, the goal is to get them to the point where your building is part of helping to build a more integrated Boston. And if that's not your goal, then don't come make money here. If you don't want to do that, go someplace else. But it's from the local authority and voice that you must say it that way. It doesn't happen naturally. You have to tell developers and those who are investing in your community, what is a true investment for you? The return on our side is that we're stronger, healthier, more integrated. And if your zoning doesn't reflect that goal, you're not going to get it, at least in Boston. Now, as I mentioned, there's these assessment tools. So we have the assessment tool that is a form that community advocates also came up with and informed all these different questions. After they've completed the assessment tool, the developer must again consider the options that are site appropriate and look at all the different forms of mitigation. Here's an example of some of the things that they're going to be given. They're giving it a housing and community profile report where they're told, okay, around this area, this is East Boston where I live. This is just an example. They're told all different things, the racial makeup of the neighborhood, the average income, the size, all of these different things are given. Because if we don't see this neighborhood reflected in your building, as in, here's the average income for this neighborhood, here's the average rent in your building, there's a huge disconnect. You're clearly not building for this neighborhood. Looks like you might be creating a concentration of wealth and actually creating a concentration of racial segregation in your building. You cannot continue the way you're going. That's one way. And then we also give them a displacement risk and historic exclusion report so that we understand if you're in the middle of a displacement crisis. And this is kind of a heat map that we came up with when I was the director of Office of Housing Stability, assessing displacement patterns and looking at what races and what neighborhoods in which we're losing individuals. And this is, again, done within the city. And a heat map, I mean, we can give you all of these are the raw data points, just a screenshot of them, but that's what we use to help come up with our heat map. Now, unfortunately, the print is too small, but this is ultimately the assessment form, and I can send it to somebody if they want to send it around. It's also available online where you can pull it up. And the best thing about this process is it's completely transparent. So the assessment toolkit that the developer submits will be available for the community to see online. The back and forth with the interagency will be available for folks to see online. If you are finding that the assessment toolkit and the back and forth doesn't make sense, you can just submit your letter in opposition or a concern about a project, which I think is very innovative in allowing for people to also talk about whether this project is healing or hurting a community. The committee I mentioned involves several stakeholders in the city of Boston, including BHA, our public housing, Department of Neighborhood Development, now the Department of Housing, Commission with Persons with Disabilities, Office of Fair Housing and Equity. Because the AFFH standards we wrote to apply to all protected classes of individuals that we believe have been historically discriminated against. So, as I mentioned, this the advisory committee goes through, gets all of these different plans. They form an advisory role, go back and forth, and provide recommendations to the board ultimately as to whether the project should go forward. The developer is required to pick one of each of the forms of mitigation, and also may be required to continue to add additional supplemental process options, depending on how much we really feel you're meeting the moment. So here are some of the interventions that we've suggested, or some of the mitigation. You can add additional IDP, those are affordable units. You can make the actual affordable units even deeper in their affordability, have higher accessible numbers of accessible units, those are for folks with disabilities, higher proportion of family size units, as you know, families are the biggest group to be discriminated and displaced first. Higher proportion, or provide all of the affordable units on the site. Right now, they'll build a building and say their affordable housing quota, they'll put someplace else. Increase the density to increase units available to protected classes. Then there's also the marketing, which they already do with affirmative marketing, but making sure that we're marketing to rental housing holders in Boston. I think in other urban centers, our per family or per individual housing voucher actually went up, so they can compete more on the market. It's a small area housing voucher. That's what we're hoping to pull more of those folks into these expensive buildings. Making sure that they're not doing background checks, and making sure that if they are, that they're really doing a best practice when it comes to criminal past history, eviction rates, credit rates, and doing our best to basically break down these barriers, or these, I don't know, these pretextual barriers that are often used as a proxy for race. We created a local housing stabilization fund in East Boston. We have that fund is now part of a trust, and encouraging developers who develop in a neighborhood to contribute to a local fund that is run by community, which is what we do in East Boston. Very excited about that. And that they can then help to supplement and help to build and make things more affordable for their neighbors. So those are some of the examples. But ultimately, it's the back and forth. And ultimately, it is the way in which we have decided that the zoning has to be part of the solution. And by doing that, private actors, especially big developers, and private projects, which is one of the few areas where zoning can go that a lot of federal money and federal laws cannot, or are challenged, that is actually one of the greatest opportunities I think localities have. So I'll stop there. I know I spoke for a while, but I did want to make sure people understood the concept. And thank you for letting me go on for a little bit.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for that very comprehensive, I think, overview, also very concise overview of the process to get to the zoning amendment and what it does for Boston and for the different communities. So I would like to ask you a little bit more about the process to adopt this. And I know you talked about the advisory committee that was created, as well as the kind of years of efforts on the part of advocates and community members to look at, how can we do better with displacement? How can we do better to heal our different neighborhoods and communities? in Arlington, and I think a lot of the DC area, there's always a tension between making the development process too burdensome and potentially, scaring away or, driving away certain, new development that could reinvigorate certain areas or add, new economic opportunities. How did you guys kind of shepherd this process through? And I assume you probably had similar sort of concerns that were raised by different members of the community or different interests. And what did that process look like? Did you guys have a lot of pushback initially politically? Was this kind of something that you had to keep bringing, up time and time again until finally it is ready for everyone to get on board, or was it a little bit more smooth sailing? Just curious about what you guys experienced in the process to actually get this adopted in Boston.
So you saw that we filed it in 2019. It didn't become law until 2021. So there was a bit of a pushback. I filed in 2019, and our legislative sessions end at the end of the year. So it had to be refiled in 2020. And that's when we experienced, honestly, I think the resurgence of the civil rights movement with the murder of George Floyd. And there became a moral imperative. We have a problem, as most cities do. It is based on race, and you need to do something that helps to heal this. And in Boston, we have been really good at causing harm with our zoning. Who got the burdens of the highways, who got furthest away from the best schools, who is in a transportation desert. And you can find that working class and people of color are consistently in that group. And that's due to zoning, that's due to planning. We prioritized, and I think other urban centers did, the commutes of folks from the suburbs to come into, and that's why you built highways in people's communities. You prioritized suburbanites being able to commute to their jobs in Boston in their car and get the hell out without having to integrate or be in the community. So the first thing we had to do is, and I want to thank Quinat, who was a fellow from Boston, I think Boston University. She was a grad student, for helping us come up with the receipts, as the kids say, because we had to say, this is the harm we caused. And that became part of the moral imperative. And then the murder of George Floyd, and then the city of Boston, the mayor at the time, Marty Walsh, and his development team agreed, we will implement this.
Thank you for that kind of background and history, and it makes sense. I would imagine there'd be pushback, and the confluence of kind of the window opening up for things like this to pass. Probably, it's not open all the time, and it's awesome that Boston was able to take the step under your leadership, and I'm sure with the support of a lot of other really dedicated, passionate people. I think my next question is, we're 1 year out essentially from Boston, passing this AFFH zoning amendment. What are some of the lessons learned that you've seen? Have many projects gone through this process? What feedback have you received as a city councilor, or has Boston received from people who've gone through it, from community members? Are they happy with how, the level of access and transparency that they have in this process? Just, if we could learn more about how's it been going over the last year, and, do you see opportunities for things to shift or maybe change a little bit moving forward based on what you've seen? I know I just threw a lot of little sub questions at you, but anything that you've learned over the last year since implementation, I think would be really helpful as we look at, should Arlington or should other communities adopt something in a similar vein to this?
So in the last year, I wouldn't say too many projects have come through, but the projects that have come through, I think have been actually a decent process, where there is a constant back and forth and understanding of a new culture setting. And that's what I think is really important. When you do something as magnanimous as this, you're setting a different culture for how developers come to approach your city. And you'll find most developers have never studied this. They don't know anything about it. They never thought this was part of how they're going to analyze a project or even design. So it's beyond many people's sense of is this normal? Why do I even care about this? Civil rights, The other issue I think we have is, so approaching them is oftentimes telling them that it even exists. And then they're kind of like, okay. We did put in timelines, by the way, to make sure that there was a back and forth that moved along. So to deal with some of the worries of developers, so that, you know, contemplating the best way wasn't going to be an intentional delay. But ultimately, I think we have 2 different mayors now, and I would love nothing more than for there to be, one of the concessions I made was that we were not going to have community members on the advisory committee. I'm just being totally transparent. It's the politics, right? But under Mayor Wu, I think if the city council and the community approached her, I think she might be amenable to adding a different kind of community process in the room, if you will, where it happens. So I'm hoping that'll happen. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to. But right now, the back and forth seems pretty on schedule. I have not heard any delays or cries about, oh, there's no development going on because of this. If at anything, it's because we transitioned into a brand new mayor, first woman, first person of color.
Thank you for that additional information about how it's been working. And it's certainly good to hear that there haven't been a lot of, you know, issues that have popped up in the last year. I have a question kind of about the criteria that this applies to, and is it limited to just like major development projects, or does this get applied to, is there a certain like sort of size limit that, you know, if it's below a certain level, then they don't have to go through this process, and it's only like really major ones? And I think in Arlington, we recently had Amazon's second headquarters, you know, coming here, and I would have loved for something like this to have been in place as we've looked at that development and that planning process over the last couple of years. But is it more limited to sort of major developments like that, or is this kind of broadly applied to a lot of different development happening throughout Boston?
So that was another concession we made. Initially, we wanted it to apply to all projects, because all projects can be injuring and causing racial segregation, right? But we decided instead to keep it to the larger projects, in part because our system already exists for deep analysis for different veins of a project. So there's a TAPA agreement, which is the transportation agreement, and they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on transportation with large projects. They go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on the environment. So what we're basically saying is this is no less than, also no greater than what you already go through, except we have a moral imperative now as a city, and you're going to do this analysis as well. And large projects deal with that. But a person who owns what we call a triple decker, you know, 1, 2, 3 apartments, they don't go through this process normally. They wouldn't have the lawyers to go through this process normally. They wouldn't have the designers to go through this. They're going to get, giving them a heat map of displacement. They might look at you like, I don't even know what this means. What am I supposed to do, right? So we have kept it at large projects, but I think in our deeper analysis, once we finally see how it's gone and how's it impacted timelines, and also if they've adjusted their culture for us and they come a little bit more correct, then I hope we can bring it down the threshold. But I think right now we're working with people who have more capacity at the initial part right now. It is a culture shift. I mean, people have to understand that, like, they know to come to Boston with at least 13% affordable units, because that's what we have right now. That was an executive order. That's a culture shift. That is not the law. The mayor led and they followed. The mayor will lead again. They will follow her. But we must make that very clear.
Thank you, Councilwoman Edwards. I think that's also super helpful context and about the kind of realities of implementation of something like this. Can you, so looking at some of the questions, and I think you kind of touched on this in the remarks that you just made about kind of the level of effort from staff within the city of Boston to support this. And one of the questions that we have was, you know, Arlington is a large population-wise county within the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have a lot of resources dedicated towards planning and towards, you know, our housing community development department. There's a lot of communities throughout the rest of the state that are much smaller, have much fewer, they may have one housing staff person. is this an approach that you think could be translated to communities like that? Or is this really something that only kind of your wealthier and more staffed up communities could probably afford to put into place? Or is that something that came up in some of the discussions with potentially other communities throughout Massachusetts as you guys were going through this process?
Well, I do believe you have to ask yourselves, can harm happen at any one of these communities? Has zoning been a harmful tool? And if the injury can happen at any size community, then the healing must be able to happen at any size community. And so if you're talking in terms of, yes, it does require resources, it does require analysis, but trust and believe, if you're trying to bring a professional sports team to your small town, you can figure out a way with your lack of staff to figure out what you want to do. And it's the same way a lot of people do things. You partner with academic institutions who will do the research for you for free. You partner with nonprofits who are dedicated to these things. You could partner with, if your committee isn't going to be something, because you don't have as many interagencies as Boston, you do have apparently a very robust, intelligent, and active NAACP branch. That has experts here. If you want it to get done, you can get it done. And that's what I think, again, treat it like it's any other infrastructure and analysis that you would do. If you're trying to prevent climate change or flooding, you grab from whoever gives you the advice. It's the same thing. You need to first, and I would say the best argument is the moral imperative. You have to, as a city and town, be honest about how you got to where you are. You're not going to sit there and say, we just want to do this because it feels good. No, you need to say this is a harm caused due to these laws or the lack of implementation of these laws. But there was a decision made. We make now a different decision, and we make it and provide for the team, the coalition that will help us bring that healing around. And you may bring it around at this size because you're this size. You may bring it around at this size because you're this size, but you're going to bring it around if you make that decision.
I think that's a really excellent point, and I hope all the people listening, especially within county government, can sort of take note of that. That if you make the decision to move down this path, you'll figure out a way to do it, whether you have extra staff or not, if it's something that you're committed to. And I think that's something we've talked about with equity in Arlington, that if you're actually committed to it, if it's actually a priority for your community to address the harm that's been done and try to affirmatively further opportunity for historically disadvantaged or people within your community, that you're just going to make it part of what you do. You're going to set aside money. Oh, go ahead, Lydia.
Sorry to cut you off, but I would even just cut off with the historically disadvantaged. I mean, you could purposely excluded populations, right? Intentionally harmed. And you need to use those words because the researcher will drive where those intents were. And I will tell you, the person who wrote the most impactful report was Quina, a grad student. She came here, she was a fellow, and it's 35 pages long, and she went neighborhood by neighborhood. This is what happened in Chinatown. This is what happened in Roxbury. This is what happened in East Boston. These are the intentional decisions that the city made to harm these populations, Chinatown being predominantly Asian, East Boston being predominantly Latino, Roxbury being predominantly African-American in the South End, West End, a neighborhood that was razed, literally just gotten rid of by our planning department because they felt it was the best thing, and it was very ethnically diverse. And so these were intentionally harmed communities made by decisions of those in power who had zoning power, saying this is, you're worth sacrificing, is what they decided.
Thank you for that. I wanted to turn to another question that I saw in the chat. You'd mentioned that the toolbox of remedies that have come out of this process is growing. And the question was around, have developers sort of come up with some creative concepts to add to that list, or where are you guys getting some of these additional kind of creative ideas as to how do we address this harm and how do we help make the community whole and heal?
I would say, again, developers are still struggling with the culture shift. So I wouldn't say that they're ready to lead on a lot of these conversations. However, they definitely appreciate the list because you know, what was traditionally happening. So at least here in East Boston, we negotiate with developers. You know, give me some planters down the street, clean that thing up over there, provide some jobs over there, as part of like the mitigation that they give to the community. And so depending on the priorities of the local politician and those who had the politician's ear, I'm the first person of color to ever be the district city councilor too. I also speak Spanish. I come from legal services and community organizing. And so I met a whole different level of East Boston politically active people. Most of my clients I knew were undocumented and were my neighbors. So I wasn't as satisfied maybe with you donating a bunch of jerseys to the local Little League team. But I didn't have a guideline for what's healing. And so coming up with that, the advocates did, and other things, you know, laws that we can't pass, we're actually putting in as potential mitigation. For example, right of first refusal. I know that DC has that, TOPA, we're trying to pass that. But if a developer went ahead and said that, I will give right of first refusal to these tenants after 20 years. They could become homeowners after paying rent, not being late. That would be huge for wealth transfer. The Fed report that came out, as you all, I'm sure, have read about Boston, the average net worth of a white family in Boston is $250,000 in Greater Boston. The average net worth of an African-American family is $8. Okay, 8. That's not a typo. And so, you know, housing policy directly leads to wealth transfer. And so having a right of first refusal, having a cooperative option, which has not been flourishing enough. I'm a cooperator. That's why I went back to school and got my LLM in cooperative tax. Actually, I believe in economic democracy. Most local policies do not implement them appropriately. But to see that as a form of racial healing, very few are doing that. But to have that list come up, you know, you be as creative as possible. And then requiring, that's what's most important. Whatever list you have, you require that the developer to even go forward, they have to pick a certain number of those things. It's an option. That, I think that's one thing I would change too, Kellen. We were, another concession, we only got them to say, like, pick one. Trust and believe, I would have had them pick a lot more in order for them to continue. But again, we have a new mayor, so maybe.
Thank you, Councilor. Just everything you're saying is so inspiring too. It gives me a lot of energy and excitement as you know, we've made recommendations to Arlington County that, you know, please look into doing something similar to what Boston has done, and we've kind of outlined you know, some key areas that we'd like the county to focus on and continue having that conversation. And I just feel sort of reinvigorated in moving forward with that effort and trying to figure out, you know, what can we accomplish within our community here to try to move this forward and to undo the harm that we know has been done in Arlington County. And we have a lot of data and a lot of research has been done on redlining and segregation throughout our community. And so we know the harm, and we know the harm is still continuing, that we're still suffering displacement, we're still suffering you know, lack of opportunity for a lot of residents, and there's a lot more that needs to be done. So this is great to hear. I did want to let people know, again, if you do have a question, you don't have to just put it in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand and go off of mute if you have a question, you know, directly for Councilor Edwards. We may also just have a shot at with us today.
Kellen, did you get, I mean, there's a few questions in the chat. Did we cover them all?
I covered some of them. Let me look through now to see if there's other ones that I missed.
Let me just say before we go to our questions, Councilor Edwards, you're like Keldon stated, you are just a force to be reckoned with and very inspiring as a leader in all things housing. What I'm taking away already, things we all know about at the NAACP, is, you know, having these moral imperatives, right? And the system that we currently have here in Arlington, which was intentional and purposely excluded populations of people of color in Arlington, a place that once was about 30-some% Black, for example, right? And now we're down to 9%. And our housing, as far as people of color minorities, is dwindling away, and large scale development is here. So how we navigate and move through, I think there's a question about the Dillon rule in here, and those restrictions from that is a lot that we have to deal with here in Arlington. But there's some questions. I hope we can get around this discussion and people come off the microphone and with the time we have left. This is amazing, Kellen. Thank you.
Thank you, JD. It looks like we did have another question, and that was about how Boston, through this process, assesses sort of the financial value of the developments that are happening and the trade-off and benefits with the community. And what does that analysis kind of look like? And I know that that's probably a pretty broad question, but I think to ensure that for the value that developers are getting from that development, because they know, as you said, it goes to their bottom line. They know exactly how much money they're projecting to make off of the development that they're working through. Is how do you guys assess what level of community benefits need to come out of this process to ensure that the community is benefiting, at least, and then again, I don't know what that ratio is for Boston, but if you could enlighten us a bit on that, I think that would help answer the questioner's question.
Well, I think that, so we're talking about healing, right? And so I don't know that you ever put a number on that, right? The question for the city is, what is the priority? For a long time, it has been to create a huge tax base and to get people who can afford to pay for these luxury units here to pay into that tax base. The city of Boston's income is 70% property taxes. And so anything that was adding to that tax base was considered good. And again, trickling down in terms of if you build enough luxury units, somehow there'll be a trickle down of affordable units. We know that's not true, but that was the mentality. And also, if you're building enough stuff, somehow, it'll trickle over to people of color, and they'll get some kind of job, and they'll get some kind of in there. And that didn't happen. And we have a perfect lived example with the Seaport. They not only found that it's the whitest development or neighborhood we've ever built, but the people who built it overwhelmingly were white developers from all over the country, but they were not people of color in Boston who got a piece of that pie. So I think the question for the city, and Boston again had itself exposed because we saw that of the $600 million we put out on an annual basis in city contracts, less than 1% were going to women and people of color. So these kinds of receipts really don't allow for, and I'm glad they don't allow for but how are we going to make sure we make money conversation? Because we'd be like, what we are you talking about? You're certainly not talking about Boston, which is a majority minority or people of color city, right? So we as individuals are not making that money. So I think the argument, and I understand every city is going to be different. You're asking questions that you likely are going to hear. What's the ROI? What's the return on investment? I think you need to get that receipt of what your net worth analysis is. Because when we throw the $250,000 versus $8 in people's faces, that return on the investment that someone could become a homeowner and live in an upper middle class community, or afford to live near a good school and afford to live near their job and live near public transportation, that's going to be a massive amount of wealth transfer and gaining for a community. I think that's the return on investment that government needs to be looking at, not just their tax base.
Thank you for that. We do have a couple other questions that came in while you were talking. One of which is, how do you select the committee members? And that seems like a key to the whole process. And I believe that's referring to the committee members who kind of assess what the developer is planning to do. And I know you said that one of the concessions was that there are currently no community members on that, but can you tell us more about who does sit on that committee and who, kind of has that authority to review and approve or reject these plans?
So the inter-community includes members of the Boston Development and Planning Department, the Commission on Disabilities, our Fair Housing, and our Department of Neighborhood Development, and specifically Office of Housing Stability. So those are the 5-ish kind of anchor intercity organizations. And like I said, I do hope at some point we will have advisory committee members who came up with this idea be on that advisory group.
And I think that kind of leads into the next question we have in the chat, which is kind of how did this idea come up, and were there models that you looked at in other communities around the country to sort of say, oh, we can do this. We can put AFFH into our zoning amendment, and we can create a process that actually looks at the harm that was done and how we can, try and undo some of that harm or add benefits.
Oh, sorry. We came up with it, and as I mentioned, the concept of combining AFFH, where AFFH existed. It's been existing in our laws since '68. It has not been used or touched or examined or given regulations until Obama in 2015, right? So it's been an untapped resource. His administration said, we need to go here. We need to go here. This is where discrimination is. This is the future, is proactively seeing these things. But like most federal policies, it follows federal money or federal laws. And the issue is local zoning can undo them all, and has undone it all the time. Civil rights legislation and looking at it was always in the local implementation, where we found the disconnect. So here's the disconnect in Boston. The Community Advisory Committee says, this is the wonderful tool. Since we're analyzing all aspects of the city, this is one more that needs to have this implemented, right? So it was led from community. The city council then pushed for it and kept pushing for it. And then the BPDA finally agreed to do it.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. So our next question is around, was this spearheaded through City Council first and then BPDA, or vice versa? Or was it more collaborative? And this is a question from someone in Charlottesville, Virginia, and apparently Charlottesville is looking at redoing or rewriting their zoning code, and they're excited about, this is a possibility to integrate into that.
It was pushed on our local zoning. It was pushed on them from the city council. It was a push. It was a grind. It ended up being a negotiation, ultimately, a political strategy, and we got it done. I mean, I think ultimately they are excited. We're the first in the nation to do it, so we did not have another community to look at. Other communities have looked at AFFH in their city halls, if you will, but not to put it in their zoning. Excuse me.
I was looking to see if the head of our planning office was on, but it doesn't look like he's currently on on the call. But another question that we have in the chat is,
it was a minute ago, Kellen.
Sorry, go ahead, JD.
Yeah, Daniel was on a minute ago.
Oh yeah, for the planning commission. I was thinking of the planning director.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, certainly, if the head of our planning commission, if Daniel's still on, if he has any questions, because this is an idea that we've shared with the planning commission as part of our recommendations. There we go. Daniel, did you have any questions for Councilor Edwards? I think you just joined a couple minutes ago, but.
Yeah, the only thing that I can really say at this point is that I'm really glad that you're here, and that I'm glad that this webinar is happening. I got caught up in a work emergency, and so have missed basically everything, and it would be irresponsible of me to ask a question given that. But I can and will say thank you for participating in this event, and thank you to the organizers for doing this. There's a lot of people on, and it looks, I assume that it's been helpful, and I'm grateful to everyone for your involvement. That's all I can say.
Fair enough. Thanks for being a good sport, Daniels. We put you on the spot there. And just a reminder, everyone, this recording will be posted on our YouTube page as well. So people who missed any portion of this can go back and learn all the great information that Councilor Edwards had brought up. We had another question: is single family zoning a barrier in Boston to the success of this program? And that's something that Arlington right now is looking at. We have a missing middle study that I think last night just released the recommendations publicly on changing some of our zoning and adding duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes across the county to try to combat some of the historic redlining and limited zoning that was really meant to keep certain people out of certain parts of our community. Is that a barrier that that you deal with in Boston and to the success of this process?
Not necessarily, because this process is about usually when someone is purchased and trying to build big. Does that make sense? So we're already in that headspace where they've purchased in an area and they're already trying to build big. We're just trying to put on, the analysis of what they're doing and in that. We actually analyze that. So when I told you we give out 2 assessment reports at the very beginning. One is an historic exclusion report, and we would say, as a result of the current zoning or whatever, so on and so forth, this is why this neighborhood looks this way, or this is why we're in a displacement crisis. But we analyze it. But the point of a lot of these projects is that they're changing the zoning anyway, and so. I'm sure some people would want to stop that, but I mean, we're usually, by the time they're submitted this, we're moving along. We've decided like Suffolk Downs, it's an opportunity. Now, we actually confirmed Suffolk Downs, and as part of my negotiation to support it, I made him retroactively agree to have the new law apply to him, sight unseen. He didn't even see the law, but I didn't care. So now if he comes to do an amendment or change over the next, it's going to take 20 years to build Suffolk Downs, and it's going to be 14,000 construction jobs. The massive, we can build a middle class with this. And so that now he has agreed retroactively to allow for affirmatively furthering for housing to apply to his analysis of every single amendment, and zoning relief that he tries to seek over the next 20 years is huge. So those are the reasons why we're very excited about concepts of this and how it's going to go. But I think if you're trying to stay within the zoning, single family housing, I know has been readily critiqued for trying to keep the status quo. It's just not enough. If you're just trying to become more dense, I will tell you, you can when you come to Boston, we'll go to one of the most dense new neighborhoods called the Seaport. They got that density. There is not a single family home in the Seaport. It was all vacant land. And I am telling you, without the actual moral and legal demand that you will take meaningful actions to remove the obstacles to opportunity. That is the language that we use, and we chose the federal language because that was tried and vetted in court. Unless that is in there with whatever change you are trying to make, you will not get to the core of the harm of racial segregation. So yes, if you want to become more dense and you need more housing stock, that absolutely makes sense. But if your housing, you can have a lot of more housing stock, and you will find a lot of upper middle class white folks are able to move in. But if your goal is to affirmatively further and to have integrated housing where people of all races and class backgrounds can live in your neighborhood, you must make that the law. You must put that in your zoning. That's how all of our projects will be assessed going forward in Arlington. The opportunity is there or not.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. And I think with that, we're basically out of time.
Wait. Oh, Brian. I'm sorry,
Yes.
I thought Brian had his hand up. Can I answer?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you. And I'm happy you touched on that just now about supply versus changing the ordinance code, because here in Arlington, Virginia, we've had that conversation, and someone mentioned earlier the missing middle study, where the recommendations to increase the amount of duplexes and multiplexes and townhouses in areas like I live in Courthouse, actually in Arlington, Virginia. But to Senator's point, without making that change in the code, you'll just find people who have the economic flexibility to move into those apartments over people who most need it. And so what recommendations would you have in a situation where it really is the zoning code, with minimum lot requirements and such that really are an impediment, even if you have built to scale, if the apartments are there, if the townhouses are there, but you don't have a code that is adapted to really enforce the sort of vision of racial justice that you want to see, what difference would it make?
I agree. One without the other is going to get you a lot of units for upper middle class, predominantly white folks with no children at that. Don't have any kids. Don't get partnered up because they're building studios and 1-bedrooms too. So I mean, that's what we built overwhelmingly. And Suffolk Downs initially on its plan. And at one point we could maybe do a whole webinar because I think that was I was trained by James Jennings, who's a professor at Tufts, how to do it myself, because that's what I was negotiating with Suffolk Downs. And so he said, this is what you need to do. Look at the racial dynamic of East Boston. Now, average income. Now look at what his rents are going to be. Do they meet these? And I said, no. And he said, the other thing that was so key was look at the average family size. Okay, found it. We have a lot of babies in East Boston. We're an immigrant community. We're about 2.8. All right, that's our average family size. Then I looked at, and they put in family size, by the way, in their zoning. A lot of people don't know to look for it. He was planning for an average family size of 1.4. So that's why 70% of the 10,000 units that were initially planned were for 1-bedrooms and studios, 30% for 2s and 3s. We are the exact opposite in East Boston. Now, none of this mentioned race. And I don't believe he was intentionally trying to do anything besides meet his bottom line. But I am telling you, when you have a community of color next to a planned project that from its very structure of the families that they're going to go in there is to the utter exclusion of its neighbors, bing, and you could, all the zoning relief in the world, we had tons of density coming in there. It was gonna be everything. You were not gonna have to worry about single family homes. I don't think there are any single family homes in Suffolk Downs. Maybe in the first row right next to the neighborhood, there's a group of townhouses for ownership. After that, it scales up dramatically. But that's when we said we're not welcome here. And there's not a sign that says Black people aren't welcome. There's not a sign that says poor people aren't welcome. Your design says we are not welcome. And that, I mean, we can do that if you want another day, and we'll go through our concessions in the breakdown for what we call cooperation agreement on transportation, on jobs, on environmental justice. We did all sorts of analysis, and I did my own set of community organizing outside of the development agencies because I didn't find that they were sufficient at all. We did nighttime meetings, we picked a topic, and then we summarized 700 pages into a 10-page document that was read at 5th grade level. That's the average reading level. We translated it into Spanish. I speak Spanish, so I was able to do my talks in English and Spanish. And at evening times, we provided babysitting and food. And we invited everybody we could come to talk about housing. We also did peer-to-peer education and got people in the community to tell their neighbors about the project. And we did that for housing, for homelessness and recovery, for transportation, for environmental justice, and for jobs. Jobs being the biggest one, we had well over 300 people come. And we organized and got a PLA, which I think is very important. It's a project labor agreement. The entire campus will be built union. 20 years, 14,000 jobs, union. We have a Boston jobs policy as well. I don't know what Arlington's is, where we require 51% of the jobs to go to folks in Boston, 40% to people of color, 12% to women. We have an enforcement mechanism to back that up. But see, all of that comes from development. And we were able to say we're meeting AFFH opportunities because we were finally coordinating all these tools that operated in silos. We've had the Boston jobs policy since 1980 something. It's never been seen as part of the analysis for whether a project goes through or not. So I know I talked a little bit longer. I know we had to shut down, but I'm happy to continue the conversation and just, and this was, we didn't have AFFH. This was just straight negotiation. This is just straight to the street organizing. which is what I come from before I went into politics. So that we had to do that. We had to do that.
Thank you very much, Councilor Edwards. I think we'd love to have you back for additional discussion and kind of, going down this further. And I think as Arlington moves further along this process, and I should mention too that right now for the DC region, there's a regional effort by most of the local governments to work together to come up with a fair housing and equity plan based off of this pretty massive analysis of impediments of fair housing choice. Definitely the most comprehensive effort that I've ever seen in this region. And so we're excited to see what comes out of that process. And I think they're making really good strides. And actually, no, I'm not supposed to comment on what those are. They're not public yet, but I think there's opportunity to integrate, some of this into that work as well. And so, again, just thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for your efforts, first as an advocate and organizer, and then as a member of the city council to push this forward for the residents of Boston. I'm excited to see, what we can do to move this forward in the DC metro area and especially in Arlington. And this is just super inspiring to hear you talk about this. And I learned a lot. And I think it helped make the documents that I'd been reading more real too, to hear you talk about it and why you did this and how it's working in practice. Super helpful. So thank you so much. Again, we look forward to having you back another time and happy to working, I guess, with your Senate office that after today. But congrats again on that. But if you had anything you wanted to say to wrap it up, you're welcome to. But I think that's all I had to say.
Well, I'll say that I was able, after all the, I think there's I'm gonna have to go on mute, but I'll just say this. We organized, we fought, we had 2 different mayors, but I think the hardest thing that a lot of young politicians or organizers forget is that you can win by just sticking to what is morally right. You can win politically, you can, and as long as you bring the receipts. Everybody will tell you it was a long time ago. It is every day. And there's a reason why they're still first next to my name politically in a minority city. And I will just say this today, not only I am the senator, but I have all of Suffolk Downs in my district now because I'm the senator of Revere. That is the other 25%. So the developer couldn't get rid of me. And the other research you should do, last point, don't stop at the LLC. We require in our zoning an actual demonstration of who owns the percentages of the LLC. So we found at night that is a huge point. And if you're going to do organizing deep, you need to know who was behind the curtain. So while HYM on paper owns 100%, 95% is owned by William Harrison, a young man in his 30s, who also owns the largest mountaintop in the world and got his money through the old-fashioned way, inheriting it, 4th-generation billionaire in Texas. So that pissed off people at levels you wouldn't understand, and it really helped us to put us in a position to say, let's channel this moral outrage to be better. So I'll say that, and I'm leaving this job anyway, so it's going to be recorded on YouTube, but oh well. I won, and because I speak truth. So thank you for this opportunity. You let me reflect honestly on my last 4 years. I've been fighting Suffolk down since I got in, and the fact that we got it all the way to 2021, and then the special election happened, to be able to reflect on this and what we got done today. And now it's seen as the baseline. We got 20% affordability. We got them to give millions of dollars to prevent displacement now in East Boston. There's a lot there. And I would love to sit down and talk about some of those veins of benefits one day, with or without AFFH, that I think minimally large scale projects should be funding.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. And with that, I don't want to take up any more of your time, which I'm sure you have a lot of things you're doing today to wrap up your last day at City Council. And
I'm cleaning the fridge and cleaning the floor. I won't show you the rest of my desk. It's embarrassing. But yeah.
Thoughtful of you to clean it yourself. Yeah, thank you so much again, Councilor Edwards and Senator Edwards. Just so thankful that you were here with us today, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. Take care. Bye.
Bye.